all, with the appeal of nihilism, uh, you would make a very good traditional uh, Theravadan, nihilistic and life divine. I think the things that stand in the way of that for you is that you are an optimist, and being an optimist can make it difficult to develop the necessary cynicism to be that kind of
Yeah.
Theravadan. Well, and also uh, being a caring and empathic person will make that almost impossible as well. Um, then again, the other obstacle, which I've seen a lot of traditional Theravadins overcome, is the fact that you do enjoy sense pleasures, even though you try to restrict yourself to those that are relatively harmless to others. Um, yeah, but okay. Nihilism is just a view, it's just another view. As a matter of fact, the first sutta in the Digha Nikaya is the Buddhism just tearing to shreds all of the nihilistic and eternalistic views. It's just a view. And as a matter of fact, beyond that, everything is just a view. So if everything's just a view, you might as well choose and develop the view that is going to work best for you in the maximum number of ways. Now, if you want to carry nihilism, if you want to make that nihilism, then what you're going to inevitably end up doing is being like the Jain practitioners in the day of the Buddha. For them, the highest degree of spiritual development was to brush clear a piece of ground of any small organisms that they might sit on, sit down, cover their face with a gauze, and not move, not eat, or not drink until they died. Right? Is that is ultimately where this nihilistic view will take you. That's the only rational approach. Um, Meaning. There is no view that is anything but a view. And since it's only a view, it has no ultimaticity to it. So therefore, it's always going to run dry on the meaning side eventually. That does not mean that that doesn't mean that there can be no meaning in your life. As a matter of fact, there has to be. Without meaning, you will die. You will die sooner. You may die very soon. The lack of meaning in itself is enough. I mean, Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, this is based on his experience in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And the death camps are a really good model for life brought to its extreme. Why bother trying to survive another day? What meaning can you derive from life in a death camp that um, there's absolutely no reason to hope that you aren't going to die in that death camp, and every additional day you live is going to be another day of seeing the misery around you of other people and becoming progressively more miserable and debilitated yourself. You're not going to have a will to live, and you will not live very long in that mind state. So if you even adopt something very vaguely close to uh, a view that's going to run dry of meaning, you are going to die, because we only live because to the extent that our life has meaning. And as we become more perceptive and more intelligent, it becomes more and more difficult to find meaning in the things that most people find meaning in. This doesn't preclude a life with meaning. Life has the meaning you give it. And once you begin to give meaning to life, um, where it can take you, especially in a Buddhist context, is this place of no self. You stop, it doesn't have to have meaning for you. That meaning can be a meaning independent of you, which is actually what you really wanted all the way along. And
Yeah.
what what always makes every other view fall apart is it ends up being all about you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So then what's the point? Might as well die now. Why wait till tomorrow?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I've struggled, is because I do.
So you said whatever knowledge you attain, you're going to lose. Yeah, but does that mean that knowledge is gone? Well, I can tell you because I've learned that it's not going to be. That's you might temporarily be able to hold on to that, but you have to discover the same thing for yourself. Okay, but I can assure you that once you've passed from non-existence to existence, there is an ultimaticity to every single thing you ever think, feel, do, say, anything like that. It becomes a part of this whole that actually encompasses both what exists and what doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It encompasses, in terms of what doesn't exist, it encompasses both what could exist but doesn't, and what could never exist because it's impossible. It becomes a part of that whole, and therefore it has some kind of meaning, which may remain from forever unfathomable to you, or you may be able to understand and appreciate that and incorporate that into your own life and understanding. Anything, any knowledge or wisdom you attain is going to exist forever, regardless of what happens to you. And that in itself is a key. Doing something versus doing nothing. Doing nothing may be more appealing than doing something, but even physically, if you sit still all day, at the end of the day, you feel stiff and tired and achy. If you go out and are active in the world, you feel better. Um, if you have some reason, doesn't matter how contrived or real, if you have some reason to do more, it may take more energy and it may be exhausting, but you are being more fully. And to be more fully is enriching in and of itself.
Uh,
It doesn't even matter if what you were doing leads to your physical death and you don't get to repeat it tomorrow.
mm,
It is in the present that everything has whatever meaning that you want to bring to it or that you can understand.
Thank you. So, but it's just I don't have that sort of aggressive, sort of pit bull attitude to life that I see a lot of people have, and I just never have. And I've always thought
Hmm. I don't either.
I'm wasting my opportunities, right? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, if it helps, I don't picture myself at all as having a pit bull attitude. It's just I get out of bed with a smile on my face, wait to see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's mm, there's nothing aggressive about it. I'm like you too. I this COVID thing's been no problem. I'm happy by
Yeah.
myself. I'm happy with my books. I'm
Yeah.
happy with my own mind.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think it is just that existential uh, sort of why and what are we doing here that really I probably spend a lot of time on, or have spent a lot of time on, because of the kind of person I am, my particular psyche. Um, so to sort of segue this into our conversation for today, I suppose I just want to ask you about that, though. I mean, I'm reading now the Wild Ivy, which is the autobiography of Zen master Hakuin. I'm not sure I've pronounced his name correctly.
Hakwin, yes.
Hakuin. But I mean, he talks in many of these records of these Zen masters, they talk about this, burning fire effort that they make to their practices. Where, I mean, last night I was reading, he and a fellow monk sat opposite each other for 7 days straight and said, we are not going to sleep, we're going to meditate for the next 7 days. And they actually took a bamboo staff and placed it between the two of them, and they said, you know, if one sees the other person starting to doze off or lose concentration, you're supposed to pick up the shapei and hit the other person with. And that they did that, and they make these almost superhuman efforts in their practice for years and years at a time. And you hear people going off to now I know that there's a more extreme, which is the people who go off and you know, live in caves for decades at a time, and I'm sure that is not, strictly speaking, necessary for the average Joe to awaken. But
Not only
can
though,
you
that's a good way to get stuck and not get anywhere.
right, and we have talked a little bit about this last week, but I suppose what I'm asking is two things. One, is it really worth it? I mean, is it really, really worth it? What, I mean, sell me on this whole awakening thing. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to share our conversation today as part of our
Sure.
thing. So sell me on, you know, is this really worth it? All this effort, all these sacrifices that, I mean, I'm lucky. I don't, lucky, I suppose, is a relative term, but I'm in the position where I'm not living with a family, and I can choose my time to meditate and all of that. But there are people out there who are running 2 jobs with kids and a mortgage and all of that. And it's quite an effort for them to even spend 45 minutes a day on the cushion. And yet I read all these accounts of Zen masters who are saying, well, you'll never awaken that way. You've got to do a lot more. So firstly is it really worth it to do this? Is awakening that amazing? What is it really like? And the second part is, what do you recommend if someone really wants to do this? If they really do want to be awakened in this life, don't sugarcoat it. Just give it to me straight.
Is it worth it? It's absolutely worth it. Okay, is embracing life worth it? Absolutely. You use the word sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Sacrifice is only a point of view. If you want a new car, do you sacrifice your bank account to get one? Not if you're happy with the car, not if you really need one and you really like the one you get. Where is the sacrifice in that? You know, sacrifice is a point of view. I'm given life, I'm given energy as a gift. I didn't make it happen. I get to spend it however I want. And some people, it's a struggle. To some people, I'm making sacrifice. To some people, I'm enduring hardship. Well, yeah, I am. All of those things are true, but they're not the only truth. You know, is awakening worth it? To kind of riff off of something that Shinzen said a number of years ago. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but one day of being the way I am right now would be worth 20 years or 50 years of being a wealthy, famous, physically fit, sexual athlete with women hanging off my arms and eating the finest foods in the finest restaurants and flying places on my private airplane. One day would be worth 50 years of that. There is no way. Yes, it's absolutely worth it. But it's not even getting there that's worth it. It's because it is only a journey. Every moment of the journey is worth it. It may take a little while to learn that, but that's what you will learn. I look back on my life. I've been through a lot. I wouldn't change any of it. I mean, I'd like to try out. I'd like to have the opportunity to try out a few different versions, but I would never go up anything that was my life, is my life. Sure, there's things that from one point of view I'd like to change, and there always will be. But my liking to change them is if I can just let that be without clinging to it and making it into a story, then it's okay too. It's okay that I'd like it to be different. Uh, and it doesn't take away from the fact I'm glad the way that it was. And if that sounds like a contradiction and a paradox, well, it is. And so is everything that matters in this world. Looks like a contradiction or a paradox from a simplistic point of view, but understand it more fully and it's not. So I can assure you, you cannot, well, the thing is, you're fundamentally incapable of imagining what you have not experienced. And of course, too often we have it happens that we get what we want, but it turns out not to be as good as we thought. This is the other side of that. No matter what you think it's like to be awakened, you're wrong, and it's better than that. That's all I can say.
I think linking this back to what I was discussing earlier was that I think that's where a lot of my disillusionment came in, is that I've achieved many goals in my life that I set out to achieve, and they were just getting it was never as good as one thought it would be, and it was never permanently satisfying either, even if it was for a moment. But even in that moment of satisfaction, it was already starting to dwindle, right? And it's awful. I mean, that things are that you work your whole life. Let's say, I'm going to use an extreme example. You work your whole life to like win a golden medal at the Olympics, and I just know that that person may feel absolutely ecstatic in that moment, but that moment is going to start fading away as soon as it's arrived.
Right. So accept that. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, while the arriving may not seem like it was worth it, the getting there certainly was. So, keep on going. Give up the idea of arriving, being there.
Yeah.
It's so trite to say it's not the destination, it's the journey, but it's the truth. And every time we think it's the destination and we get there, we're going to be disappointed. Once we get to know that, well, it's not really what it was about. It's about the journey. And the journey continues. And that's good, because that's where all the goodness was anyway. It was in the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are Olympic athletes who have gold medals, and maybe they hated all those days and months and years of practicing and training and everything else. That's too bad, because there's a lot of people that never got a medal in the Olympics, but they participated year after year, and they loved what they did, and they loved the training, and they loved getting to participate, and not getting a medals. Well, it was kind of too bad, but I'll try again next year. Approach life from that point of view. Don't be the disappointed gold medalist. You can either be the joyful gold medalist, or you can be the joyful first loser.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I can't remember whether it was an article or I read or what it was, but they said you can always look at the podium and you can see the person with the silver medal kind of always looks very disappointed. The person with the gold medal is thrilled that they've won. The person with the bronze medal is just so thrilled that they've made it onto the podium. They are grinning. It's the person with the silver that never looks really very happy. And I always thought that was a sort of fascinating thing about human nature about this.
That's a marvelous observation. I haven't watched the Olympic finalists enough to have seen that myself, but
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it tells a very profound story, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Do watch it, because I said, well, I'm going to check this out, and I watched it. Sure enough, the silver medalist never looks very pleased.
And I believe that. It makes total sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But you say, but okay, so I understand this, and I say this a lot with my clients as well. As I say to them, happiness, as trite as it sounds, happiness is not a destination.
Mhm.
You don't arrive in Happyville and live there for the rest of your life. Um, and the problem is that even if you have a place designated or a situation designated as Happyville, once you get there, believe me, it gets old. And I found that with just about absolutely every desire that I've ever had, worldly desire that I've had in my life, which is kind of where I think this ennui came from. It's like, even achieving all the things that I've ever wanted to achieve, when I do achieve them, it's like, oh, it's such a letdown eventually. And you
Yeah.
go, well, really, what's the point? Why not just kick back and, you know, let the river of life take you down, and put your paddle in the water and keep yourself on course, but don't make too much effort, because what's the point? And I think that's really where my feeling of disappointment has come in.
Well, I like the way you put it. So as long as you've got the blinders on and all you can see is the goal, you miss out on the journey. You remain blind to the fact that you were unhappy before you started and you're disappointed when it's over. So you think, well, why didn't I just sit where I was in the beginning? It's because, open the windows out, realize it was the journey that was making you happy anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I mean, that is so consistent with everything that you always talk about, and in all the books I've read, is that they say, happiness is found in this moment. This is the only place that happiness can be found.
Yeah.
And
Right.
once you realize that, there's no destination, there's no nothing you've left behind. It's all right here, right now.
Yeah. That's right. Happiness is in the present moment. It doesn't matter whether you're uh, in a prison camp in the present moment. That's the only place that you're going to find happiness is in that present moment.
Mhm.
That is such a profound realization, but it doesn't function as an idea. It's a realization,
Mhm.
and you know,
And would you say awakening is at least partly that realization?
yeah, I'd sure say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, mhm.
And
Yes.
and again,
This
that's
idea that there's some place to arrive. There's only one place to arrive at in life, and that's death.
mhm.
So if you're in a hurry to arrive at death, then you can arrive at a pseudo death, you know, leading a very ordinary life, which is a pretty empty and unsatisfying thing, right? But you know, that's the only destination. So enjoy the journey.
Mhm. And so, to my second question, thank you. That, I mean, that's a lot to think about. I can't respond sort of off the cuff on that, because it's a lot. You've actually said a lot there, and sort of things that I've thought about many times. But that's the second part. The second part of my question. So you say awakening, as Shinzen Young says, is absolutely worth it, and it's beyond. It's the exact opposite of most experiences in life, where you think uh, it's going to be so great when you get it, and then it's a little bit of a letdown. In fact, it is something that is beyond your wildest dreams, to use a aphorism. Um, but what does it really take to get there? I mean, if you've now said, listen, absolutely go for this, and you say that in the introduction of the book, meditation has all these sort of fringe benefits, but go for the awakening, because that is really what this is all about. What if if you're speaking to all your students now, and you say to them, this is what I want you to, this is what I need you to do uh, to get to this point. um, these are the stops you have to pull out.
Yeah.
Lay it out there for us. What does it really take? Because I think a lot of us are practicing half-assed. and because of doubt, I think, is part of it. We can't imagine what it is that we're really aiming for, which makes it very difficult to motivate oneself.
Yes. Well, yes, you embrace it fully. Look, look for the joy. Like, really, I've covered, what I discuss in the Mind Illuminated about the stages of meditation. They're really the stages of awakening, and more fundamentally, they're the stages of living a full life. Sitting down on the cushion, actually beginning the journey. You have to have a motivation. You have to have a hope. You have to have an aspiration. You absolutely do. And you have to begin with the premise that uh, that that aspiration and the intention it gives rise to is the only thing that you bring to the process. Everything, then you have to get out of the way and let it unfold. You have to stop trying to be in control. I mean, after all, a major, uh, when you start out that a major landmark on the journey is going to be when you let go of the need to be a self that's doing anything. Start living that in the moment. Look for the joy. The sixth part of the Eightfold Path is right effort. What a lot of people don't understand is right effort is not striving. Right effort is joyful effort. How can effort be joyful? Only if you have embraced some idea of it. This is my best shot at having things better than not just better than I ever have, but better than I've ever been able to imagine. So that's where faith comes into it. It's not faith in some other power. It's got to be faith in one's own power that this is accessible to me. That's what taking refuge in the Buddha means. It means here was a human being. He achieved awakening. He achieved enlightenment. Uh, Now, if I allow other people to convince me that he was a special being before he was born, then I'm going to say, oh, well, that was him, not me. Um, Forget that. That's not taking refuge in the Buddha. Taking refuge in the Buddha is saying, if he could, I could. Let me give it a shot. Let me try, right? Taking refuge in the Sangha. I mean, there's all these other people that, if anything the Buddha taught was true, then there would be all kinds of other Buddhas. And indeed, there are, including some living Buddhas. That's taking refuge in the Sangha. Well, another aspect of taking refuge in the Sangha is I've got all these other people on the same path to support me. I'm not alone in this. I may stumble and fall, but there's always somebody there to reach out a hand. Taking refuge in the Dharma is there's actually a path that I can follow. I'm not having to do this blindly. The way has been paved and it's been trod by many before me. So, that that if you can take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha in the right way, that will give you the motivation. Then your effort will be joyful effort, that no matter how much I feel like this is a struggle, I know that in the end, it won't have felt like a struggle at all because, the Buddhahood and, the awakening, it is in my grasp, within my grasp. And what you need to get beyond, and now we're starting to get into like stage 3, moving to stage 4 territory. Before I wrote TMI, it seemed like every meditator I came across got as far as sort of advanced stage 3, touched into stage 4, and never realized that they could go further than that, quite honestly. Well, the counterpart of that is realizing that you don't become an arhat and it's all over. That's back to the old way of thinking that's going to get you nowhere. The only end is death, the Mahaparinibbana, right? Yeah, that's the only end is death. The rest of it is a journey. You're on the journey now. As the Buddha said, it's good in the beginning, yeah, and it's good in the middle, and of course it's good at the end, but it's good in the beginning. From the day you embrace this and throw yourself into it wholeheartedly, your life has much more meaning than it ever has before.
And
Come and see for yourself, right? Try it. You'll like it.
yeah. And as you said, the one, I mean, I think what you're saying there is, even when you're struggling, take comfort or take joy in the fact that that moment of struggle is bringing you closer to this fantastic new perspective on life and way of existing.
That's right. Don't tell yourself I am struggling. Struggling's happening. What the heck? Well,
Yeah.
some days it rains, some days the sun shines.
Right. And I think it is true. If I look back at so let's say strong dullness in stage 4, that when it was happening, it felt like an absolutely insurmountable obstacle. I thought it was really one of the most awful feelings possible to wake up first thing and feel really refreshed from having slept really well, and sitting down on the cushion and within 5 minutes feeling like I wanted to go back to bed. That was such an awful feeling, and I thought, why am I doing this to myself? When I look back at it now, I go, that was nothing. That was not it. That was like, it wasn't that bad. Come on. And it was absolutely worth it, because look now, you don't deal with that ever, or you hardly ever deal with things like that. So it's sort of that rosy retrospection, but quite an enhanced rosy retrospection.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But
and that gives you the motivation to go back and do it again the next day and
yeah.
the day after,
Yeah.
to meet the next obstacle. You've overcome dullness, then you end up somewhere else and you think like, well, they just remember you overcame dullness, you overcame gross distraction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that then leads me to the last question, because as I said, I've read a lot of Zen accounts, for example, or even someone like Dipa Ma or Ayya Khema, who, you know, they flung themselves into their practices, I think, as the sutras say, as if their hair was on fire. And, you know, they made these Herculean efforts. I don't know what the female of Herculean would be, but made these tremendous efforts. And you look at them and you go, well, you know, I can't do that. I simply don't have the time, or I don't have the energy, or I don't have the health, or whatever the case may be. Can you just talk a little bit about what does it really take, and what your students really need to do for this to be in real terms, you know, in everyday human being living in New York City kind of terms?
Mm-hmm. Well, like this, throwing yourself into the practice like your hair is on fire. That's an attempt to communicate the degree of commitment. If your hair was literally on fire, you would be extremely highly motivated to put it out.
I'd say, yeah.
If you acknowledge the unsatisfactoriness of life rather than just trying to hide from it, escape from it, chase after some little thing that will take it away. Um, it's like realizing that your hair is on fire and you do have to put it out. I mean, may I refer you to the Buddha's fire sermon, as it's called? But it is really true. And it's recognizing that and giving up the foolish idea that uh, that that this is that the only thing that is available to you is a slightly better version of that, and trying to make yourself accept that. Deepa Ma didn't accept that. Milarepa didn't accept that. I mean, how many times did Marpa tell him, take that stone house down and build it again? You didn't do it right. And Milarepa did it. Obviously, he had this compulsion, this desire. In my own case, even as it became harder and harder, even as I learned how much more difficult it was to find the answers that I sought, I could never be satisfied with ceasing to look, right? My hair was on fire, and the only way to put it out was to go out there and try to put it out. And I didn't even know how. I hadn't even discovered the Dharma. I didn't even know that anyone else knew their hair was on fire and was trying to do anything about it. I hoped so. I hope to find that answer in so many different places. But from my point of view, what was there to do but to try to discover whatever it was that would put out the fire in my hair. And I may look to people now as if I'm throwing myself into life like my hair was on fire, but it long ago ceased to feel like my hair was on fire. I'm riding this fantastic momentum, and the momentum builds with every step I take.
Right. And I think Shinzen has talked about this a lot, about awakened people, where he says, there's a kind of buoyancy that they have to life, a kind of flowing that they go through, and it really is quite apparent. But until you get to that point, and to go back to the metaphor there, I mean, if your hair is really on fire and your child is next to you screaming for breakfast, and there's a mortgage bill lying on your table, you don't give a two hoots about that. All you care about at that moment is finding some water and getting your some relief and putting out the fire. Now, to take that metaphor into people's lives, what we are not suggesting, or you are not suggesting, I take it, that it's like, okay, well, forget about your kids, forget about your family, forget about your job. If you really want this, if you want to put out the fire, you've got to like, and I think a lot of people consider this, say, well, I'm giving up everything. I'm giving up my job. I'm going to sell everything I own, and I'm moving to a temple in Sri Lanka till I get the fire put out. And that's where I think the struggle with that metaphor is.
Yes. Well, and any metaphor is going to fail us at some point. But to use it in exactly the form you did, yeah, when you first realize that your hair is on fire, you're not going to care about your child is crying or the bills that need to be paid or anything else. You're going to look for some more immediate relief, some water. But when you wake up the next morning and you realize your hair is still on fire, after a certain number of those mornings, you're going to say, well, okay, while I'm looking for water, let me take care of my child. And let me find, once I put enough water on my head, I'll get around to writing a check and put it in an envelope to pay my bills, and going to work to get a paycheck to be able to do that, and things like that. It's a learning process. The Buddha left home. I left home too, but under different circumstances.
Yeah.
Uh, People go into monasteries.
Yeah.
People do leave life behind. Um, that's the way the Buddha did it, and so that's the way, for the first part of his teaching, he thought everybody needed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, he didn't. He was much more open to, hey, you can do the same thing as a layperson, as an upasaka.
Yeah. So absolutely, you are saying this is totally doable. As a layperson, you can still have kids, you can still have a job, you can still pursue, your worldly needs, not necessarily chasing the worldly dharmas, fame and all that, but the basics, the essential of living a householder's life, and still find and still eventually put out the fire. Right. Is it then a case more like the Zen, so to mix metaphors here, like the Zen, where they say it's not like being drenched by the rain, it's like walking through mist and very gradually being soaked until eventually one day you realize you are wet.
Sure. Yeah.
And is that sort of what the middle path really then is for the householder, the middle way?
Yes, it certainly is. I like that. I like that, walking through the mist until one day you realize that you're wet.
Yeah.
Because that much more accurately describes it.
That's the classic Zen metaphor for the gradual path, is that it's not about jumping into the water. It is walking around in a mist slowly and it slowly permeates, and slowly you start realizing, well, I'm a little damp. And then eventually you realize, well, I'm totally drenched and this is as wet as it gets.
That's right. And there's this silly, naive thing of comparing a sudden path to a gradual path as if they're different from each other. It's very true what some teachers say. You're already awakened, you just don't know it. But the knowing it is the awakening, right?
Yeah.
The moment you step out into the mist, you're already started getting wet. But and somebody could come along and say, hey, look, you're already wet, so don't worry about it. That doesn't mean you're not. That doesn't mean you don't have to stay in the mist any longer, because you do. You have to keep walking through the mist until you do realize that you're wet. You
Yeah.
Right. And as they say in the Sudden Enlightenment School, now that you've achieved awakening, there's a lot of work to do.
Very interesting that you bring that up. In Wild Ivy, I just was reading, Hakuin was talking that the post-Satori training is really where it's at. Like he says, oh yeah, Satori, that's great, but that is the absolute wrong time to roll up the mat. That is when the real work starts, and he makes quite a good case for that.
Yeah. So I could say to you, Juno, you've already arrived. Don't worry about can you get there. You're already there. Yeah. All you have to do is just do the work so that you can reap the fruits. The fruit is ripe. It's all hanging there on the tree, but you still have to go and pluck the fruits.
Oh, lovely. Right.
So that's another approach to giving you the inspiration you need to keep going.
Yeah. No, and I think that is part of the reason. I can't remember who it was, but I think it might have been Ram Dass or anyway. But somebody asked him, well, "Why do you meditate? Why do you bother about all of this?" And he, whoever the person I'm referring to, said, "Well, because there really is nothing else to do."
That says it so perfectly. I have answered similar questions exactly that same way. There's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, that's what practicing like you're hair on fire means. It's just realizing that there is nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Fantastic. Is that something you could just tell me, sort of ballpark at before your apart from retreats? How much time were you spending a day meditating?
Uh, well, as much as I could, and when I say as much as I could, partly it's in terms of the other things that other demands on my time and energy, but the other part of as much as I could is as much as I could motivate myself to do. Now, very realistically, that's always a part of it. What did I settle into?
Mm-hmm.
I settled into a pattern of, well, I'll tell you, a typical day would be that I would get up early in the morning before either my son or my wife. And I'm talking about, let's see, I guess if when I was living with my son and when I was living with Nancy for the first time was in 1985. So that would be 35 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So 35 years ago, I developed a routine of getting up early in the morning, and I'd meditate for an hour or two. How long I'd meditate would depend on how late I'd stayed up the night before and what time I woke up. I had fortunately, by that time in my life, reached a place where alarm clocks were rather superfluous. And that was for the best because when I woke up, I'd be awake. What I would do is practice for an hour or two, depending on how much time I had. Then I would sit in a hot bathtub, maybe read a little Time magazine or something like that before finishing my morning routine and getting dressed. Usually, while I was in the bathtub, Nancy would get up, my son would get up and start getting ready to go to school, things like that. Um, Now, I always set aside a day of the week that I didn't go to work, but and I tried to make it not on a weekend because, well, my work was Monday to Friday anyway. Nobody expected me to work Saturday and Sunday, so I had the weekends free for all of the other kinds of things that people use weekends for. I always made sure, despite the effect it had on my income, that I had at least one work day a week. When I was living with somebody, as I was living with Nancy and my son Charles, he'd go to school, Nancy would go to work or school. Initially, she was still a university student as well. And I would, you know, after I finished my morning routine, I'd done my morning practice, I'd finished my morning routine. Then, when everybody left, I'd decide how much of my day I was going to devote to formal practice, how much to study, how much to what I kind of regarded as contemplation, you know, and that's how I would spend my day. Okay, so that was one day a week, and the other days of the week were, like I say, usually meditating an hour to 2 hours. But yeah, there were those times when all I could really afford was 15 minutes. I had developed a habit though of, even if I only had 15 minutes, I wouldn't say, well, I only have 15 minutes. I'd say, at least I have 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, for that matter, I think I did that when there was only 5 minutes, but
Yeah.
at least I didn't, I didn't break the momentum of sitting. And that's what I would encourage. Based on my own experience, and not just my experience, eventually, as I began passing this on to other people, I I found it's pretty universal. When I say a minimum of 45 minutes a day, better an hour, but anything less than 45 minutes is, you're going to be like at an ant's pace in practice. Yeah. Far better to practice 2 hours one day and 5 minutes the next when you have to, but get a solid 45 minutes to an hour for as many days in a row as you can.
Excellent. And I have found that to be true is even just there's a very nice video, if people haven't seen it, with you and Stephanie Nash, where called "Why to Practice Longer," and you said, you know, that the difference between 45 minutes and an hour is actually monumental in terms of the amount of progress you make, and that I have found that to be true. Like an hour seems to be the gold minimum rather than 45 being the gold minimum.
Right. Yeah, 45 is not the gold minimum, it's the minimum.
Yeah, it's the minimum. And then the other point that you mentioned, 2 days ago, I was feeling really, really ill, and I'd taken medication which made my head swim. And I thought, oh my God, no, I'm not going to meditate. I'm not going to meditate. And then I thought, no, I can do it for 15 minutes. And I set my timer for 15 minutes, and it was a horrible 15 minutes. I really didn't enjoy it because I was really drugged up and feeling quite awful, and I was sort of propped up on my couch. But just doing that 15 minutes felt like such an accomplishment. And then afterwards, I realized I hadn't broken that momentum. And the thing is, I have experienced it for myself. When you break that momentum, it's really not worth it, because to build that momentum up again, there's just so many barriers that you have to break down again to get back to that point. Now, it doesn't take that long. It might only take 2 or 3 sessions, but still, it's not worth going through that.
You're right. It's not.
Yeah. So I think we'll end up on this. We've got about 8 or 10 minutes left. When I first came to know you and your work, I saw a video that you did for Tricycle. You did a 3 or 4 part introduction to TMI. And at that stage, TMI had already been out for a while. And you said, well, my experience is that if you commit to 1 to 2 hours of practice a day, with trying to do 1 or 2 retreats a year, as you are able, that within 3 to 5 years, you should, it would be quite reasonable for you to master the 10 stages. Now that you've had many years since the book is published, interacted with hundreds of students since then, what is your current assessment of the rate of progress through the 10 stages and what it requires? Give us the ballpark average. We've now talked about specific situations where you might only have 15 minutes a day, but yeah, what is your current, if you had to rewrite that section of the book now, what would you say?
Well, it wouldn't be a lot different. But it's so misleading, because it's like taking everybody who's ever played tennis and saying, what is the average time that any tennis player takes before they win the Wimbledon? You know, there's a lot of them that they don't even, it doesn't even occur to them that they would ever want to play tennis at that level. There's a lot of them that only play tennis because they'd rather get exercise that way than go jogging or go to the gym or something like that. You see the point I'm getting at? Having seen a huge variety of people that are drawn to meditation for one reason or another, there's only a self-selected, and this is the important part, self-selected part. People come with all kinds of other obstacles, circumstantial or, inherent, they have ADD or whatever else that might create an obstacle. But the subset we're talking about here is the subset of all of those meditators that will embrace the goal of awakening. So I'm encouraging, if I can increase the percentage of that, then I've achieved one of my goals. Okay. but it's a different question. If we're not looking at all meditators, we're looking at those that have embraced meditation as a very real path to awakening, and awakening is their goal, and that's why they're meditating. Within that self-selected subset, I would still say that those numbers are pretty right on.
That's wonderful.
At the end of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha said that anybody that practices this for 7 years, nay 7 months, nay 7 weeks, and 7 days, will achieve, if not arhatship, then the non-returner stage. I mean, that's not the language he used, but if you know the Pali well enough and interpret it properly, that's what he was saying. Applying this to what the TMI is describing is the 10 stages of meditation development and guidelines for that development. It is possible to achieve stage 10 without having reached at least stream entry, but it's highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely. And what it is, it's a very truncated, sort of streamlined practice that ends up fulfilling the definitions of what it means to have achieved samatha and vipassana, but not with the breadth and richness that allows for the full development of insight and stream entry. It's also, stage 10 can also be something somebody experiences having already reached not just stream entry, but one of the higher paths, even the highest of the 4 paths that the Buddha defined, which, by the way, isn't the highest path. Right? But anyway, I think that what people need to understand, what I tried to point out, even though TMI is about meditation, awakening is not just about meditation. All of this other stuff I put into appendices, and I built it into the meditation practice. You have to give up the notion of being a self that's in control, and eventually of being even the self that's the experiencer of things. And the seeing is only the seeing. There's no one who sees, and so forth. I built that into the practices I selected in order to, show somebody how to go through this developmental process. I didn't explicitly identify it until later on. I said, well, what is necessary for insight and what's necessary for awakening? You have to have already done this work, but it's more than that. You have to have the right understanding. You have to have applied that in your life in the forms that that both the loving kindness meditation and the mindful review bring about. Which then takes us into right speech, right action, right livelihood. Meditation is only about right effort, right samadhi, for lack of a better word. Concentration is a horrible word.
Yeah.
And right sati, which I think we're kind of stuck with the word mindfulness in that.
Well, I'm happy to use the Pali terms, so yeah.
Anyway, meditation is about those last 3, but without the first 5, you're going to be one of those that arrives. You can arrive at stage 10 without having even experienced satipatthana. But if you have embraced the entire Eightfold Path, and if you haven't let all these bits of guidance along the way, if you haven't let them slip by you and you've embraced them, then chances are you're going to arrive there as if not an arhat, then a 3 times returner, or a non-returner, or twice returner, or for sure a 7 times returner. That's how you refer to it.
So am I am I understanding correctly that you said, although the book doesn't explicitly say so, the whole of the Eightfold Path is built into TMI through the auxiliary practices and through the intermediate. I can't remember what they were called again. Where you describe the models of the mind.
Oh yes, yeah. It's pointed to repeatedly in many different ways. It couldn't be an effective guide to meditation and encompass everything else. As a matter of fact, even as a guide to meditation, there are single sentences and phrases that could be developed into a whole chapter in themselves.
Right.
And that was a lot of the process of making what I wrote into a manageable book, was condensing all this stuff down into a compact form.
Yeah, and that's something I have mentioned to you before, is that going back and sometimes I read a sentence and I haven't read it in 3 months and I go, wow, I just completely misunderstood how important that sentence was and what it was really trying to say. So that's the limitation, I think, as you said. Otherwise you would have ended up with a 10-volume series or something like that. But is it then that TMI ended up being kind of a foot in the door, an introduction, so that people could whet their appetites and go, hey, I know that there's more to this. This is a joyful beginning, but there's so much more.
That's right. That's what it was intended as. And I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, at least, I started the next book, and 2 years ago I started the next one after that were intended to complement TMI, because TMI is primarily about meditation, but points to these other things. Another book that I want to write is primarily about right understanding and the conative aspect, right view, and right intention. Then that was the book that I started something like 3 years ago. And the one I started about 2 years ago and want to get back is addressing this deeper aspect of the Dharma, specifically in terms of what is insight or knowledge or wisdom, and what gives rise to it. What are the process of maturation? How do these different aspects of insight, knowledge, wisdom come together in such a way that they lead to attainment of first path, and then how are they further developed to lead to attainment of second path, and so forth.
Yeah.
See, these are the things that I couldn't put into the Mind Illuminated. When I write about how insight develops and how it matures to bring about first path, second path, and so forth, it gives me the opportunity now to show what should be happening as a person practices from stage 7 through stage 10, okay, which I couldn't put into a book on meditation for all kinds of reasons, but mostly because it would have been too long and it would have been too much in one place and it would have been distracting. It's like, are we talking about this or are we talking about that? We got to make up our minds. So we're talking about meditation.
But still, even without that, those texts, which I'm sure everyone will be, well, I certainly am looking forward to. But if you just use TMI, that would open the door for you to explore that territory on your own, or at least gain some first-hand experience that would guide you in selecting, further study materials. Is that?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
TMI tells you about no self. TMI tells you about impermanence. TMI tells you about both suffering and emptiness, and it tells you all about the interconnectedness of everything. It just doesn't elaborate. It just hints and points, right?
Yeah.
So this could be the further development of that.
Well, I mean, I think those books written with a kind of clarity that you brought to TMI, which is what continually astonishes me as I reread it, is how clearly you've expressed very difficult ideas and very succinctly. I mean, I think that that same kind of clarity provide to those more advanced topics, if you like, um, would be really, really welcome. And I'm not sure that there is much like that on the market for the Western person at the moment.
Nothing at all from my point of view.
Nothing at all from your point of view, because certainly there's so much written out there, and I have a small library growing here, but nothing that I could pick out bits from different books, but nothing coherent like that. So how those do you have a timeline yet for those books? Sorry, I don't mean to put you into a corner here, but
well, they've been in a gestational state, in an interrupted development, but continued to gestate in my mind, despite all of the other things I've had to deal with for the last couple of years. I'm hoping that they can come together within another 2 years at the most. And I'll probably, of course, it's going to make much more sense they're complementary. And so it makes sense to work on them both at the same time, up to a point. But there will come a point, and I think I know where that point is, where it'll be appropriate to focus on one and get it completed.
Get it out,
focus on the other one. So I'm always overly optimistic in my predictions, but my is a couple of years to get this.
Sounds wonderful.
I'd love it to be sooner, and I won't be surprised if it takes longer.
Yeah.
As long as I have the time.
As long as you have the time, right? So
this is the gift that, for some reason I don't know, I've been designated as the bearer of.
Yeah.
And so this is my responsibility. This is what I need to do before I go. Right?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different kinds of assistance that people could provide if they chose to. And I was hoping that what I said was enough to convey to people, and they can think about it. And, if they want to, they can figure ways that they might help with that.
Yeah.
And that extends even to there's a couple of people, one involved in the Dharma book and one involved in the Insight Awakening book. These two different people who are contributing, who have contributed to the writing of these in much the same way that Matthew and, well, actually, no, I would say these people have made a much more substantial contribution than Matthew and Jeremy did to the mind. They were mostly doing editorial things. And there's another person he's now doing a master's degree in Buddhist studies, but as my research assistant, he was brilliant. I would give him a topic and he would just plow through the suttas and through some of the Mahayana sutras and gather together all of the information, the sources, so that I could draw upon that in my writing. I mean, that's a kind of assistance. It involves.
That's very valuable.
Yeah, it's a much more close working together than other kinds of assistance that people could provide.
Just to give us a quick health update, just because that is one of the things which does take up your time, energy, money, and all of that. Tell us what's going on with you health-wise.
Well, nothing progresses in a uniform manner. So there's ups and downs, but my energy levels and I've had really serious problems with respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, all of these things. They're all improving. I've just gotten totally into supplements and alternatives, while at the same time working very closely with my oncologist, pulmonologist, cardiologist. It's like I've got this whole spectrum.
You've got a whole wraparound team, which is what you need.
Yeah, trying to maintain my body, and so I'm, doing the medical thing, but at the same time taking advantage of all kinds of alternatives, and they are expensive. But
Yeah, yeah. Okay. But you have had I think what a lot of people might not know is you have had a recurrence of the cancer, and so
yeah,
that's what you're trying to work with now.
yeah, it was in steady regression until June of this year.
Mm.
We've been monitoring one nodule that was less than 4 millimeters. Well, in January, the radiologist mentioned that it seemed to have increased in size, whereas before it had been decreasing. In June, I was found to have about 20 little new companions in my lungs, and had about more than tripled in size in one dimension, and more than doubled in size in another. By August, there were still more metastases, and it had grown more. I've since had a very new kind of procedure, radiotactical surgery, radiation surgery, basically on the largest one of those.
Mhm.
Had a PET scan earlier in December that showed that the cancer was still uh, progressing, but slowly. So that's where the state is of the cancer. I I overdid it in terms of my initial response to when the cancer began to progress again back in June. I persuaded my doctor to let me increase the dose of the medication I was on by 50%, and I handled that increase very well. So then I talked him into going for doubling the standard dose. It's a
Mhm.
dose that very few people have ever been on, and only in the early experimental stages of the drug, not since it's been approved. But my doctor was able to pull the strings and get approval for it. Unfortunately, the rest of my body could not handle
Yeah.
the load from that.
Mhm.
And that's what caused all my other systems to go haywire. And I'm
Oh, I see.
gradually fighting my way back from that.
Right.
At the same time, I also was experimenting with certain peptides and metabolic intermediates uh, that had been a new form of them that was actually could be absorbed into the body had become available. This was a risky thing. My oncologist also went along with this, but he said, "I think you're crazy, but if it works, this is." Um, the I my my attitude and my approach was, instead of trying to destroy the cancer because of, as if it were some kind of foreign invader, it's part of my body that is getting out of control. This happens to everybody all of their lives. Um, and the body can take care of it, so it
Mhm.
doesn't become a problem. So why, instead of focusing on harming the cancer and doing collateral damage to the body, let me do something that is going to enhance the health and strength and viability of every cell in my body. And the warnings were, yeah, but you're going to, you're going to accelerate the cancer the same way you
Yeah.
do every
Yeah.
other cell in your body. And I said, yeah, I know, but let me give all the rest of my body a fighting chance,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
You know, let's, instead of doing something bad for everyone
Yeah.
and hoping it'll be worse for the bad guys,
Yeah.
let's, drop that attitude. Say, let's do something that's really good for everyone and hope that the parts that are out of control can get taken care of in the same way that they should have been in the first place.
Yeah.
I haven't given up on that, but because
Yeah.
of the consequences of the increase in medication,
Yeah.
I had to drop that.
Right. So,
Yeah.
but now you're on a more sort of even keel path with the medication, which and you seem quite optimistic. And I have to say, over the last few weeks that we've been talking, you've looked better and better each time that we've talked. So um, something's working, I think.
Something is working, and I hope that it continues to. I shall
Yeah.
continue.
we fight the good fight. Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's everything. The last thing I want to just say is to quote Dipa Ma here, where she said everybody, and she was talking about, rural Indian women with, 5, 6 children. She said everybody can and should uh, practice enough to at least reach the first stage of awakening, and it's totally doable, and there's no excuse not to. Would you agree with that assessment?
Totally.
Totally. Yeah. So thank you. I think that's really, really helpful. If you're okay with this, I'm going to share this maybe after your letters come out, or let that settle, or I don't know, even now, and then wait for after that to release the ongoing series of our talks.
Sure. That sounds great. As to when you post this, I'll leave that up to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you. You did a huge service in helping me think about something that's really struggled, and I've talked to many people about similar topics, but I really wanted someone who was coming from the Buddhist perspective and from your perspective of life, and having dealt with so many hardships. And again, that's why I wanted to do these interviews, is like let people see what's a real life like, and what one can achieve in the midst of all kinds of adversity. So